Here's a paradox nobody seems to be talking about. Global trade has never been more efficient. Container shipping moves $20 trillion worth of goods annually. Electronics from China arrive in Los Angeles in 18 days. Clothes from Bangladesh reach New York in 3 weeks. The cost to ship a container across an ocean? Lower than it's ever been in history. By every efficiency metric, the global shipping system is a triumph. Optimized routes, economies of scale, just-in-time delivery, maximum efficiency. And yet, 90% of global container capacity is controlled by 10 companies. 10. The Ever Given blocks the Suez Canal for 6 days in 2021. One ship. And global trade loses $10 billion per day. Houthi attacks in the Red Sea in 2024 force ships to reroute around Africa, adding 2 weeks and 30% to shipping costs. One choke point disrupted, and the entire system nearly breaks. So, which is it? Is global shipping incredibly efficient or incredibly fragile? Maybe both. And when you excavate the historical record, when you dig through 800 years of maritime trade monopolies, there's a pattern, a very specific, very consistent pattern. Trade routes consolidate, efficiency increases. Then, crisis hits, and the monopoly that seemed unbreakable gets shattered by forces nobody anticipated. The Venetian galley monopoly dominated Mediterranean trade for 2 centuries. Destroyed by Portuguese route around Africa in 1 decade, the Dutch East India Company, largest corporation in history, controlled Asian trade for 150 years, bankrupted by competition and war. British shipping dominance controlled 60% of global tonnage by 1900. 2 world wars, and it's gone. Every single time, the pattern is identical. Consolidation breeds efficiency, but creates fragility. Crisis exposes the fragility. Diversification gets forced, not chosen, by necessity. Timeline? Usually 20 to 50 years from peak consolidation to major disruption. So here's the question. Are we watching the same pattern with modern container shipping? Or is this time genuinely different? I don't know, but let's dig into the archaeological evidence and see what patterns emerge. Here are the questions I want to explore. First, is there actually a repeatable pattern when shipping monopolies consolidate, or am I cherry-picking examples? Second, what triggers the disruption? Is it always crisis, or do monopolies sometimes diversify before breaking? Third, what makes a shipping system fragile versus resilient? Is it just consolidation, or are there other factors? And fourth, what does the archaeological record suggest happens when 90% of trade flows through 10 companies and 3 choke points? I might be completely wrong about all of this. Maybe modern shipping is genuinely different from Venetian galleys. But let's excavate the evidence and see what we find. Cool. So first we need to establish the baseline. Is there even a pattern here? Or am I just listing failed shipping monopolies and pretending there's a connection? Let me show you what I found when I dug through the historical record. Start with Venice, 13th to 15th century. Venice controlled Mediterranean trade through a specific innovation, the galley convoy system. State-owned galleys, organized into convoys, following fixed routes on fixed schedules, like container shipping but with oars and sails. The archaeological evidence, port records, cargo manifests, shipbuilding contracts, shows incredible consolidation. By 1300, Venice operated over 3,000 merchant galleys, but they weren't independent. They sailed in coordinated fleets. The Flanders galley route to northern Europe, the Romania galleys to the Black Sea, the Syria galleys to the eastern Mediterranean. Each route had monopoly contracts. You couldn't just build a ship and compete with Venice. The state controlled the routes, the schedules, the pricing, total vertical integration, and it worked. Venice became the richest city in Europe. Their shipping system was the most efficient in the world. Goods moved on predictable schedules. Merchants could plan around convoy departures. Insurance costs dropped because convoys were safer than independent ships. Peak efficiency. Maximum consolidation. Timeline from consolidation to dominance? About 50 years. 1250 to 1300. But here's what the historical record also shows. Starting around 1450, something shifts. Portuguese explorers discover the route around Africa to Asia. 1498, Vasco da Gama reaches India. Suddenly, there's an alternative to Mediterranean trade. You can bypass Venice entirely. sail from Lisbon to India directly. And here's the critical pattern. Venice doesn't adapt. They're locked into the galley system. Fixed routes, fixed schedules. Their entire infrastructure assumes Mediterranean dominance. The Portuguese route is longer, more dangerous, initially more expensive, but it's independent of Venetian control. Within 50 years, Lisbon replaces Venice as Europe's primary trade hub. Venetian galleys still sail, still make money, but they're no longer dominant. The monopoly is broken. Timeline from peak dominance to disruption, about 50 years, 1400 to 1450. And here's the key insight. The disruption came from outside the system. Venice didn't lose to better Mediterranean shipping. They lost to a different route that made Mediterranean shipping less critical. Anyway, that's Venice. Let me show you the Dutch East India Company, 1600 to 1799. This is the big one, possibly the most dominant trade monopoly in human history. The VOC, Dutch East India Company, was granted monopoly rights to all Dutch trade with Asia. They could wage war, sign treaties, establish colonies, mint coins, a corporation with military and sovereign powers, and they used those powers to consolidate completely. If you were Dutch and wanted to trade with Asia, you went through the VOC, no competition allowed. The archaeological evidence, VOC archives, cargo records, ship logs, shows astonishing scale. Over 4,700 voyages between 1600 and 1800. Monopoly control over spice trade from Indonesia, tea from China, textiles from India. At their peak in the late 1600s, the VOC was worth over $7 trillion in modern terms, more than Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined. Peak efficiency, maximum consolidation, total dominance. But excavate what happens next. Starting around 1700, cracks appear. Competition from British East India Company. Corruption within the VOC. Wars in Europe draining resources. And here's the critical fragility. The VOC was optimized for monopoly, not competition. They had the largest ships, the most efficient routes, the best infrastructure. But that optimization assumed no competition. When the British started competing, the VOC couldn't adapt fast enough. By 1799, the VOC is bankrupt, dissolved by the Dutch government. The most dominant trade monopoly in history, gone in less than a century. Timeline from peak dominance to collapse? About 100 years. Late 1600s to 1799. Cool. So let me jump forward to British shipping. 1800s to 1945. Britain dominated global shipping through combination of colonial empire, naval supremacy, and industrial revolution. By 1900, British ships carried 60% of global trade. British ports handled 50% of global cargo. British shipyards built 70% of new vessels. Total dominance. The archaeological evidence, maritime insurance records, shipping registries, port data shows consolidation around British routes and British companies. If you shipped goods internationally, you probably used British vessels, British ports, British insurance. This wasn't monopoly by law like Venice or the VOC. It was monopoly by dominance. Britain just controlled so much infrastructure that everyone depended on them. And like Venice and the VOC, it seemed permanent. Britain ruled the waves. The Royal Navy protected trade routes. British coal stations dotted the globe for refueling. But here's what happened. World War I, 1914 to 1918. German U-boats sink 6,000 Allied ships. Massive disruption to British shipping. But Britain survives, rebuilds. Then World War II, 1939 to 1945. More U-boats, more ships sunk, more disruption. But this time, America emerges as the dominant maritime power. U.S. builds more ships during the war than Britain, owned before it. The Liberty Ship Program, mass production of cargo vessels, shifts maritime dominance westward. By 1945, American ships carry more global trade than British ships. Britain's maritime monopoly is broken. Timeline from peak dominance to disruption? About 45 years, 1900 to 1945. And the pattern repeats. Consolidation, efficiency, fragility exposed by crisis, forced diversification. Okay, so let me try to synthesize what I'm seeing across these examples, and acknowledge up front I might be forcing a pattern that doesn't exist. But provisionally, here's what the archaeological evidence suggests. Stage 1, fragmentation. Multiple companies, multiple routes, high costs, inefficiency. Competition everywhere. Stage 2. Consolidation. Economies of scale drive merger and monopolization. Stronger companies absorb weaker ones. Routes optimize. Costs drop. Stage 3. Dominance. One country, one company, or one alliance controls majority of trade. Peak efficiency, lowest costs, maximum optimization. Stage 4. Fragility. The system is optimized for normal conditions. Any disruption, war, piracy, route blockage causes massive problems because there's no redundancy. Stage 5. Crisis. Something happens. War, new route discovery, technological change. The monopoly can't adapt quickly because it's optimized for the old system. Stage 6. Forced diversification. Not by choice, by necessity. New players enter, new routes open. The monopoly either adapts or collapses. Timeline across examples. Consolidation. 2. Crisis usually takes 50 to 100 years. Crisis to new equilibrium takes 10 to 20 years. And here's the critical insight, and I might be wrong about this: diversification never happens voluntarily. Monopolies don't wake up and think, we should create redundancy. They optimize until something breaks. Then they're forced to diversify. Now let me show you where modern container shipping fits in this pattern. Cool, so let's excavate the current evidence. Stage 1. Fragmentation. This was 1950 to 1970. Container shipping invented in 1956. Initially, hundreds of companies operating thousands of ships. Regional routes. Inefficient. High costs. Stage 2. Consolidation. 1970 to 2000. Economies of scale drive mergers. Larger ships are more efficient per container. Bigger companies can invest in port infrastructure. Consolidation accelerates. Stage 3. Dominance. 2000 to present. By December 2025, 10 companies control 90% of global container capacity. The numbers are stark. MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, 5.9 million TEU capacity. Maersk, 4.4 million TEU. COSCO, 3.9 million TEU. CMA CGM, 3.8 million TEU. Hapag-Lloyd, 2.2 million TEU. These 5 companies alone control over 60% of global capacity. Add the next 5, 1, Evergreen, Yangming, HMM, Zim, and you're at 90%. This is Venice-level consolidation, VOC-level dominance, British shipping-level control. And the efficiency is incredible. Cost to ship a 40-foot container from Shanghai to Los Angeles dropped from $3,000 in 2000 to $800 in 2019. 73% cost reduction. Shipping time? 18 days. Predictable. Reliable. Just-in-time delivery works because shipping is so consistent. This is Stage 3. Peak efficiency. Maximum consolidation. Total. Optimization. Stage 4. Fragility. This is where it gets interesting. The system is optimized for normal conditions, but normal depends on 3 critical choke points. Suez Canal, 12% of global trade. Shortest route between Asia and Europe. No viable alternative if blocked. Strait of Malacca, 25% of global trade. Only route between Indian Ocean and Pacific for large ships. No alternative. Panama Canal, 6% of global trade. Only route between Atlantic and Pacific in the Americas. 3 choke points. If anyone closes, global trade faces massive disruption. And here's what the archaeological evidence from recent years shows. 2021. Ever Given container ship runs aground in Suez Canal. Blocks the canal for 6 days. 400 ships waiting. $10 billion in trade per day delayed. Just 6 days. 1 ship. 10% of global GDP and shipping disrupted. 2024. Houthi attacks in Red Sea target commercial shipping. 100 attacks in 1 year. Ships reroute around Africa via Cape of Good Hope. Adds 2 weeks. Adds 30% to shipping costs. And the system can't adapt quickly. Ships are already built for Suez route. Schedules are already optimized. Insurance is already priced. The entire system assumes Suez stays open. This is fragility. Peak efficiency with 0 redundancy. Stage 5. Crisis. We might be entering this now, or maybe not. I genuinely don't know. Red Sea attacks continue. Suez Canal remains vulnerable. Panama Canal facing drought issues. Water levels dropping. Limiting ship passages. Malacca Strait has piracy concerns. Any one of these could trigger major disruption. All 3 simultaneously would be catastrophic. And here's the pattern from history. The monopoly players don't diversify before crisis. They optimize until something breaks. Stage 6. Forced diversification. This is the prediction based on historical pattern. If current fragilities continue, what does diversification look like? New routes. Arctic shipping as ice melts. Not chosen for efficiency, forced by Suez vulnerability. Smaller ships. Can't transit Suez? Use smaller vessels through alternative routes. Efficiency drops, but resilience increases. Regional shipping. Instead of global routes optimized through chokepoints, more regional hubs. Asia-Europe might split into Asia-Middle East and Middle East-Europe segments. New companies. If the Big Ten can't adapt, smaller companies operating alternative routes gain market share. This is what happened to Venice, VOC, and British shipping. Forced diversification through crisis, not voluntary choice. Timeline if this happens? Based on historical pattern, probably 10 to 20 years from crisis to new equilibrium. But here's where my uncertainty kicks in. Maybe this time is different. Let me give you the strongest arguments for why modern shipping might avoid the historical pattern. Argument 1. Technology enables faster adaptation. Venice couldn't quickly build new ships for Atlantic routes. Modern shipyards can. Maybe adaptation happens faster than historically. Fair point, though I'd note that ships ordered today take 2 to 3 years to deliver. That's still slow when crisis hits. Argument 2. Multiple choke points create diversification. Pressure before crisis. Panama, Suez, and Malacca, all vulnerable, means companies are already thinking about alternatives. Also fair, though the Red Sea crisis showed ships just rerouted rather than fundamentally diversifying. Argument 3. Consolidation is reversible. If the Big Ten face crisis, new companies can enter. The industry isn't locked like VOC monopoly by law. Yeah, possibly. But economies of scale in shipping are massive, hard for small players to compete. Argument 4. Insurance and financial markets price risk. If Suez vulnerability is real, insurance costs should force diversification proactively. True in theory, but insurance just got more expensive for Red Sea routes, didn't prevent the crisis. Argument 5. Regional supply chains reduce long-distance shipping dependence. Nearshoring, reshoring mean less reliance on Asia-Europe routes. Maybe we're seeing some of this, but 90% of trade still goes by sea. Even regional trade uses ships. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe modern shipping is more resilient than historical examples, but the archaeological record suggests otherwise. Cool. So, given all those caveats, let me tell you what I think the historical pattern suggests. If the pattern holds, and that's a big if, we're currently at stage 4. Peak consolidation, maximum efficiency, increasing fragility. The most likely outcome? Some crisis, probably related to choke point vulnerability, forces rapid diversification, not because companies choose to diversify, because they have no choice. Timeline? Hard to say. The crisis could be next year, another Suez blockage, escalating Red Sea attacks, major Malacca incident, or it could be 10 years out. But the pattern suggests systems this consolidated and this dependent on choke points eventually face disruption. And when they do, diversification happens fast. What would that look like practically? Scenario 1. Arctic route opens. Climate change makes Northern Sea route viable year-round. Cuts 15 days off Asia-Europe shipping. Bypasses Suez entirely. Companies build ice-capable vessels. New consolidation around Arctic route. Timeline? Maybe 10 to 20 years as Arctic ice continues melting. Not chosen for environmental reasons. Forced by Suez vulnerability. Scenario 2. Regional hub model. Instead of direct Asia-Europe routes through Suez, goods transship at Middle East hubs. Smaller vessels on more routes. Less efficient, but more resilient. Timeline? Could happen quickly after major Suez disruption. 5 to 10 years to full implementation. Scenario 3. Land routes compete. China's belt and road rail connections become cost competitive with shipping for certain goods. Not for everything. Rail can't match ship costs for bulk, but for high-value items. Timeline? Already developing. Maybe 15 to 20 years to significant scale. Scenario 4. Technology shift, autonomous ships, different propulsion, new designs that don't depend on traditional choke points. Timeline? Probably 20 to 30 years. Technology development is slow. And here's what bothers me about all these scenarios. None of them happen proactively. They're all reactive to crisis. Just like Venice didn't build Atlantic ships until Portuguese competition forced them. Just like VOC didn't reform until bankruptcy loomed. Just like Britain didn't diversify until wars shattered their monopoly. Consolidation creates inertia. Why change a system that's working? Even when fragility is obvious, optimization continues until something breaks. Anyway, here's what I think this is really about. The question isn't, is modern shipping consolidated? Yes, 90% controlled by 10 companies. That's objective fact. The question is, does consolidation always create fragility, or can you have consolidated efficiency with resilience? History suggests you can't. Venice was consolidated and fragile. VOC was consolidated and fragile. British shipping was consolidated and fragile. Every time, efficiency through consolidation created vulnerability to disruption. But maybe modern technology, modern risk management, modern diversification awareness breaks that pattern. Or maybe, and this is what the archaeological record suggests, we're just in the efficiency phase, enjoying low costs and fast shipping, not thinking about fragility until crisis forces us to. The ever-given blockage should have been a wake-up call. 6 days, 10 billion per day, 400 ships waiting. That should have triggered massive diversification investment. It didn't. Ships went back to using Suez, routes re-optimized, nothing fundamentally changed. The Red Sea attacks should have been another wake-up call. Over 100 attacks, ships rerouting around Africa, costs up 30%. And yet, most analysis treats this as temporary disruption, not structural vulnerability requiring fundamental change. That's the pattern. Optimize until crisis forces change. Never voluntarily diversify. So let me bring this back to where we started. Paradox. Global shipping is incredibly efficient and incredibly fragile. Is there a pattern? Yeah, I think so. Trade monopolies consolidate, achieve peak efficiency, become fragile, face crisis, and get forced to diversify. Timeline. Usually 50 to 100 years from consolidation to crisis. What triggers disruption? External shock the monopoly can't adapt to. New routes, war, technological change, or, in modern case, choke point vulnerability. What makes systems fragile? Consolidation plus dependency on specific routes or infrastructure. No redundancy means no resilience. What does history suggest about 90% controlled by 10 companies? That it's efficient until it's not. That diversification happens through crisis, not choice. That we're probably in the late efficiency stage before disruption. Here's what I'm confident about. Modern container shipping is the most consolidated maritime trade system since British dominance in 1900. The efficiency gains are real. The cost reductions are real. Here's what I'm uncertain about. Whether that consolidation survives the first major sustained crisis. Whether companies will diversify proactively or wait until forced. Whether the Red Sea situation is the crisis or just a preview. The archaeological evidence says highly consolidated systems optimized for specific routes always face disruption eventually. The timeline varies, the trigger varies, but the pattern holds. But archaeology tells you what happened, not what will happen. Maybe this time is different. Maybe modern shipping companies are more adaptive than Venetian galleys or the VOC. Maybe technology enables rapid response that historical monopolies lacked. Maybe financial markets force proactive diversification that didn't exist historically. Or maybe, and this is what the pattern suggests, we're just enjoying the efficiency phase of a cycle that ends in crisis and forced change. I don't know which it is, but I know that every maritime trade monopoly in history thought they were different. Venice thought Mediterranean control was permanent. The VOC thought Asian monopoly was unbreakable. Britain thought naval supremacy guaranteed shipping dominance. They were all wrong, so maybe pay attention. Watch the choke points. Notice when Suez faces problems. Notice when Malacca has incidents. Notice when Panama Canal water levels drop. Because the pattern suggests those choke points determine when, not if, the current system faces disruption. The archaeological record is clear. Consolidation breeds fragility. Crisis forces diversification. The cycle repeats, and we're sitting at 90% consolidation depending on 3 choke points with 1 ship blockage, costing $10 billion per day. That's not efficiency. That's fragility. Waiting for crisis. If this changed how you see global shipping, or if you think I'm completely wrong, subscribe to this channel. Because as the next Suez incident happens, as Red Sea attacks continue, as climate change affects Panama Canal, you'll want to understand what 8 centuries of shipping archaeology suggests happens next. History has the pattern. The present has 10 companies controlling 90%. The future has either proactive diversification or crisis-forced change. And every shipping monopoly in history waited for crisis, never chose to diversify early. Maybe this time is different. Maybe modern shipping breaks the pattern. But the archaeological evidence says otherwise.